Yes. Okay. Gladly. Okay. Good evening. Yes.
So I am making a drink that requires having fresh cherries halved into it. It's like a garnish, but it's part of the whole drink cocktail. And obviously, I want to take the stones out.
Right.
I don't want to do it before Shabbat because it's for Shabbat lunch, and the cherries probably will get wilted in the fridge, overnight.
Yes.
What can I Shabbat?
Yeah, you can. How would you normally get the pits out of the cherries? How would you normally do that on a weekday?
I just half it and take it out with my fingers.
Cut it in half and take it out. No, so on Shabbat, first of all, you would need to prepare this as possible to the meal. What's that?
Could you get me a whole bag? No, it's just the small ones. Yes, I'll transfer you. Thank you. So sorry.
No problem. No problem.
Sorry, I need.
Yeah, no problem.
Something.
Okay, no problem. I was saying that on Shabbat, you'd firstly have to prepare the this drink or the cherries with this drink as close as possible to the meal. Like we mentioned several times, that within the time that's necessary to prepare for the meal. If you need an hour, it's an hour. If you need 2 hours, it's 2 hours. Within the hour is always good. And beyond an hour, more than an hour before the meal, only if you need that time to prepare for the meal. So that's first of all.
Separating the stone out of it.
Oh, okay. So now from the point of view of separating, so you cannot do it like you do it normally on a weekday, like you said now, split it in half and pick out the stone with your fingers. You would need to sort of separate good from bad, meaning you'll be taking the cherry, the flesh of the cherry itself, what the edible part of the cherry, away from the stone. I would take a knife and sort of carve out the cherry, the edible part of the cherry, and then the stone will be left in your hand. That's what you should do. Like cut out pieces of the cherry. It's like to sort of like peel the cherry from its pit, from the stone. And then you're taking that into your hand and the rest you drop into the bin. You understand? That's the difference. You're separating good from bad instead of bad from good.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Fine. Although, you know what?
A matter of perspective, what you're doing.
What's that?
It's like matter of perspective, what you're doing. You're not doing bad from good, good from bad, because you are scooping the flesh instead of the bone.
Stone. Right. Exactly. Now, rethinking it, 1 second. I just remembered one thing. I just remembered something. When you have a melon, this could work out good for you too. When you have a melon, so you cut it in half, and then you want to take out all those small pits that are all concentrated in the middle. When you cut it in half, so both sides have now, in the middle of the melon, split melon, they have all those pits, many pits, and some garbage that you want to throw away. So this is allowed even to just scoop that out and throw it into the bin. Why is that allowed? Because we're going back to the idea of kiluf. Kiluf is like peeling away the peel around the orange. So it doesn't matter if it's an external peel or an internal peel. The moment it's stuck onto the fruit or vegetable you want to eat, and it's bothersome to reach the edible part because it's blocking you, then you can remove, even with your hand directly, the pit or the inedible stuff that's inside in order to reach the edible part of the fruit or vegetable. So according to that, since this stone, this pit in the cherry is stuck to it, and it's bothering you from reaching and being able to reach the flesh, the good part of this fruit, so you're allowed to even pick out the pit. Now I'm going back on what I said before. You're allowed to do it as you would do it on a weekday. Again, as close as possible to the meal, but within an hour, but not this issue of good from bad or bad from good. That's not an issue, actually. I'm going back on what I said before, because it's stuck to the flesh, so it's like peeling away like an orange. You peel an orange, so you're removing the bad from good. How is that possible? Because you can't reach the good. It's completely stuck and glued to it, so you're allowed to remove it in order to get to the good. So that same idea is also internally, when it's stuck to the to the edible part, you can remove it in order to reach the edible part. So actually, you could do it like on a weekday. Split it in half and pick out the stone from the cherry, and you're fine. Yep, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, now we'll continue with our exam. Different situations in Borer. So sometimes it occurs that you have a whole group of nuts of various types, and some of them have shells. And so we said already before, previously, one of the past shiurim, that we're allowed to crack it open and peel, take off the shell or take out the nut from within the shell any way possible. That's exactly what we just said now about the kiluf, about peeling. But when you have a whole bunch of them, some of them are empty. I think we've done this. We did this last week, last week. Sorry, we did this. Okay, so very quickly, I'll just explain it over again, but I think we did it. Some of them are empty shells that have no nuts in them. So that comes in with a bag. So when you reach with your hand and pick up such a shell, thinking that there is a nut inside, and then you realize that it's empty. So firstly, we have an issue of muktzeh, because just an empty shell is muktzeh. There's no use for an empty shell to do anything with it. So it's muktzeh machmad gufo. You're not allowed to even move it. Let's all gufo makomo. You're not allowed to move it even if it's bothering you where it's situated. You're not allowed to move it. It's the most stringent type of muktzeh. So you shouldn't have picked it up in the first place. So truthfully, if you can try to see before you lift up a shell, thinking that it has a nut inside it, try to make sure that it has one. If you look carefully, you may realize before you lift it up, before you're holding it in your hand, that it has no nut inside it. It's just an empty shell. So if you're able to realize that, then don't touch it. Eat around it. It's also, if you realize that it's an empty shell, then you're not allowed to pick it up and throw it away from the point of view of borer either, because that's bad from good. You must eat around it all the good nuts and leave that shell on the plate. So from 2 points of view, you should try to make sure that you're lifting up something that's edible and not something that's inedible. But if you do so anyhow, so we say like this: the point of view of muktzeh, it's already in your hand, and although you had lifted it by mistake, and it wasn't permissible to lift it up in the first place, but if it's in your hand, according to the Magen Avraham, not according to the Gra, the Magen Avraham holds that you can then, as long as it's still in your hand, you can go to the dustbin and throw it in the garbage. The Gra wouldn't say so. The Gra says you have to drop it right there and then. You can't move it. But the Magen Avraham says you can, and you definitely can rely on the Magen Avraham. So you take it to the garbage immediately and don't let go of it, because if you let go, you can't pick it up again. only with a scrape it with a move it with a knife into a dustpan, and with that take it to the garbage. That's allowed, but not with your hands. If you didn't realize, so we go by majority. Since the majority of nuts, of shells, do have nuts in them, so you haven't transgressed such a terrible isser, because it's the majority should have had, the majority do have the nuts in them, and therefore you relied on the majority, and it wasn't your fault that it turned out to be empty. From the point of view of borer, the action itself of reaching into the bag or into the pile and taking a nut, and in the end realizing that it's only a shell, that's not an action of borer. Because when you'd reached in to pick it up, your intent was not to separate bad from good. Your intent was to eat the nut. Now that it's in your hand, realizing that it's only a shell, that's called the vashanomit kavin, which is a psikresha. You had no intent. It wasn't your intent to separate. And it wasn't a sure thing that you would separate. On contrary, we said the majority has nuts in them. So therefore, it's not borer, even if in the end result was that you had a shell in your hand and you removed it from the pile. It's not considered borer, even accidentally it's not considered. It's considered a totally permissible act because you had thought that it has a nut in it, so you did nothing wrong. Okay, but in any case, we said better if you check well to make sure you're not going to lift up a shell that does not have a nut in it, an empty shell. That's not good. Okay, now we'll get into a very, very relevant and frequent issue. When you're clearing away from the table, so sometimes you have like a platter of different types of foods all in the platter. Sometimes you have people who left over food in their plate. We're talking about close, immediate family, not guests. Of course, guests, we throw everything in the garbage. But immediate family, our children, ourselves, parents, if we have some leftover food in the plate, we don't mind. It wasn't touched, of course. It wasn't touched. No one ate it itself and spit it out or anything. It wasn't touched. So we tend to put it back into the bowl and store it for a different meal. Question is, now that we're clearing away from the table, we're not going to be eating it within an hour. It's going to be for a meal hours later or the next or the following day even. So now that you have some foods all together in the plate, and one put them all, each type of food in place, one into this pot, one into this bowl, one into this utensil, going all around, spreading them to the correct pile, to the correct container to contain them for another meal or a day or two later. So it goes like this. If it's a mixture, let's say you have rice and some salad, and it's sort of got mixed. It's one on top of the other or very close to each other in a way that it looks like very mixed together. Then you definitely cannot separate the salad from the rice because it's a mixture. And even though they're both edible, you're not doing good from bad or bad from good. They're both good and both not for immediate use. They're both going to be kept for later on. We may have thought that that's not borer at all. Where do you have the problem with borer when you're not separating good from bad or bad from good? But the Mishnah Berurah, the Bir Halacha, in Shinu Tet Siv Gimel, 319, letter 3 in the Bir Halacha, he says there that even though they're both not going to be used now or eaten from now, the mere fact that you're separating one from another is considered borer. The Pri Megadim, by the way, allows this, but the Bir Halacha rejects the Pri Megadim, and we go by the Bir Halacha, who is the same author as the Mishnah Berurah, the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Israel Meir Radin of Radin. He's the authority that we, these Ashkenazim, base most of our halacha on. So we mustn't separate, even if it's for later use. Both are for later use, doesn't matter. That's borer. But if they're beforehand, we have one trick to play in order to allow us, but not in this situation that I said before, a salad mixed with rice. That can never be separated unless you're separating in order to eat immediately from them. But usually it's not the case. You finish the meal, you're clearing off, so you're going to eat it later, much later. By the way, enough that you want to eat one of the two types now, and that's enough, because you pick and choose that one type that you want to eat now, eat it, and leave over the other type. Like, let's say a kid left over salad and rice mixed together. If the parent wants to finish the salad, they can pick and choose from the pile all the pieces of salad, eat it, and then the rest is left over. That's not boring, because you're taking with your hand or a fork, that's called an extension to your hand, to eat immediately. Good from bad, that's fine. That's okay, but if you don't want both of them, you want to separate, that's not possible. But even within such a case, but not exactly this type, a little bit of a different type of case, there is a trick to do. And that is, if you have chunks of food, of leftover food, let's say a quarter of a chicken or an eighth of a chicken, doesn't matter, but it's a large piece, and a large piece of meat and a large potato, large pieces that are now combined together. What you can do in order to separate them now into each one to a separate utensil container that's meant to be in order to store it for a different meal, what you can do is something very, very, very simple and nice. Let's say you take out the chicken, a quarter of the eighth or the eighth of the chicken. You take it out of the pile and you take a small piece away, cut a small piece away with a knife, small piece of that chicken, and you eat it. So by doing so, you've used the chicken immediately. You've separated for immediate use because you wanted to eat a small piece of that chicken. You want it separate from the other foods there. You don't want to eat it while it's combined in the pie with all the other stuff. So you put it in a separate plate. You just hold on to it with your hand, cut off a piece with a knife. You wouldn't want to bite into it, because then to save it for later would not be something so pleasing for others to eat, or something that you had bitten into. But take a knife, cut a small piece away, eat that small piece, and then it turns out that you've separated good from bad with your hand or a fork or whatever that's considered your hand for immediate use, because you ate it immediately. And all the rest of the chicken is now separated from the pile. You can put it into the pot that's meant to store this chicken for later on. Then you go on to the chunk of meat, the one large piece of meat. You take it away from the leftover chunks of potato or chunk of kugel or whatever. And again, you take a small bite, cut away a small piece and eat it. And then you put the meat away. So this works for each and every type of food that you're going to take a little piece off and eat. But what's the difference between that and the rice, the combination of rice and salad? There's a major, major difference. Very obvious. If you want to separate rice from salad, if you eat a little bit of the rice, and because of eating a little bit of the rice, you want to separate all the rice away from the salad, that can't be done. That's not permissible. Because each and every grain of rice or each and every piece of salad are separate one from another. What does it help if I ate 5 grains of rice to allow me to separate all the rest of the rice? They're disconnected one from another. So that doesn't help. Only when you're talking about chunks, that when you remove one chunk of chicken, the quarter of the eighth of the chicken away, and then the chunk of the meat, and then the chunk of the kugel, and then the chunk of the potato, you remove it one by one as a chunk. So when you want to cut into it, you need the entire piece in your plate in order to cut a piece away from it. So you're removing this large piece of chicken in order to eat one small piece away from it. So you need to move the whole thing away. It comes together. It's all one chunk. It's all one piece. That's why there it can be done. But by the rice and salad, it cannot be done. Okay, so that's when it's all mixed together in a pile. Then you can have these different ways of dealing with it. Of course, the rice and salad, you would have to dump the entire mixture into a pot and keep it for a different day while it's all mixed together. You have no choice. There's no choice. There's no way that you can separate them on Shabbat if it's not for immediate use. Now, another situation would be if on that plate that you're now removing from the table and you want to put the food back into its container, if on that plate the different types of foods, leftover foods, are in different sections of the plate. They're not mixed, they don't look like a mixture together, they look very separate as is. Then that would allow you to dump each type of food into its container because they're anyway separate. And as you recall, we mentioned at the beginning of Hilchos Borer that when are we prohibited to separate? Only when there's a mixture. If it's not considered a mixture, people don't see it as a mixture, then there's no problem of separating. Although, if the adjacent close area of each type of food is touching each other, again, if you have some salad, some rice, some kugel, some chicken left over in the plate, sounds like a kid's plate that they didn't eat almost anything, they just took a bite of each thing and it was all left over. So where the different types of foods are touching each other, that's a spot where it is considered a tarovet. That's considered a mixture there. So we've said this in the past. The way to deal with that is, first of all, remove most of the rice from the plate where it's not touching at all. No connection between that area of the rice and any other food. And where it is touching, leave over one line of rice, of grains of rice, one or two lines. It should be obvious that you haven't removed the touching rice, the connecting rice between the rice and the salad. Or on the other side of the plate, it could be the rice and the chicken. Wherever it's touching some other type of food, that you leave over a line or two, and all the rest you can dump into the container that is meant to contain the rice. Then you take away the salad, except for that one line that's connected to, that's touching the rice, and so on and so forth. This way, you can remove most of the leftovers of the plate and just be left with the areas that are touching each other. That is considered a mixture, which you should not separate. Okay, you could obviously leave over a line of rice, and that line can go with the salad into the salad container. So yeah, a little bit of rice with the salad, not too terrible. And then you don't waste those two touching, connecting lines of salad and rice. Rather, you throw the entire mixture, meaning that line of touching with the rest of the salad, into the salad container, and you have some rice in your salad for the next day. It doesn't matter. Okay. Now, a totally different area of discussion. Sometimes people serve, mainly in restaurants where you wouldn't be in a restaurant on Shabbat, let's say in fancy hotels and things of that, types of such places. They would serve you a lemon in order to squeeze it over fish or over a salad. So the squeezing itself is not an issue at all, although squeezing juice out of a fruit is dash. We're not allowed to squeeze on Shabbat. That's a different malacha. We'll be getting to that malacha after Borer. Yeah, the one after Borer is chita, squeezing. We'll be doing that after Borer. So that's allowed because, in this case, it's allowed because it's going into food, into a solid food. You can't squeeze lemon into tea because tea is a liquid. But you can squeeze lemon onto fish or salad because then it's going over solid fruit. So it's considered there was never really a liquid. It went from food to food, from solid to solid, so it's okay. But as we squeeze a lemon, sometimes the pit falls into the salad or onto the fish. And then we're stuck with it inside because we can't pick it out. It's psolet me'ocher. We're taking bad from good. We're removing bad from good. You could take out by scooping away all the salad that's surrounding the pit, scoop it out with the pit, and then you haven't separated the pit from the salad, you separated the entire mixture from the salad. Or by the fish, you cut away a piece of the fish that is touching the pit, and this way you remove the whole mixture from the rest of the food, which is fine. But in some fancy places, they serve the lemon together with like a small net, a net that's surrounding the bottom part of the cut part of the lemon. And when you squeeze, the liquid comes down onto the food you're interested in having, in adding the lemon to, the lemon flavor to. But the pit will not fall into the food, because it's going to be caught by the net. Is there a problem with that? Definitely don't do such a thing. That could be an issur d'oraita of borer. Because what's stopping the pit from falling? The net. The net is a kli. That's a utensil that serves as a separator, as a strainer. And we said one of the three conditions of borer is by a kli, by utensil, which makes it d'oraita. So you mustn't do that at all. I was also asked once a while ago, it's an interesting way of doing it. I've never seen anyone do it, but interesting. If you hold your hand in a way that you're separating your fingers a little bit one from another, and then you squeeze the lemon onto your hands. Of course, wash your hands well with soap before you do this. You squeeze the lemon onto your hand, and since you're opening your fingers just by a drop, I'll show you how it looks around something like this, but holding it flat, straight out, and then squeezing the lemon. So again, your fingers will catch the pit, but the liquid will flow down onto the food. Is that allowed? Is that considered bayad? We said, ochel bayad umiyad. We need three conditions. Is that considered using your hand, which is fine? We said, if it has all the three conditions together, good from bad, for immediate use, and with your hand, then you're allowed. This is good from bad because we're catching the pit. That itself is already an issue, because some say that by catching the pit in your hand, that's what you're separating away from what's falling down. So that already would be bad from good. That's already improper to do. But some say that it's considered good from bad because you're squeezing, so you're letting out the juice. So it's as if getting the juice out and then keeping the pit for yourself. So it's like good from bad. Whatever, that itself is problematic. And then you're doing it for immediate use, providing you want to eat the fish or the salad soon after. But is it considered bayad? Because your hand is catching it. Is it considered your hand, or is it considered utensil? The answer is it's considered rabbinically forbidden. Why rabbinically forbidden? Because in this case, it's not called your hand. Your hand is when you use your hand to catch, to hold on to something. That's allowed, providing you're holding on the good and leaving the bad, and for immediate use. Here, your hand is really serving like a net. You're using your hand like a utensil, not using your hand as a hand to pick out things, take out things, lift things, hold things. That's not the idea. Here it's a sifter. Your hand is acting like a sifter. Although, why is it only rabbinically forbidden? Because it's definitely a shinui. It's definitely not the normal way. It's not the norm to sift that way. It's not a utensil you really use normally for sifting. So it's shinui in a utensil, which is rabbinically forbidden. Yes.
Would that be similar when you rinsing, let's say, cherry tomatoes, and you're just holding them in your hand like a sifter for all the debris to wash away? And same with anything, grapes, berries. Would it fall under the same category? Yes.
Like, let's say if you've got like a box of grapes or a box of tomatoes, and you put water in the box, and then you use like your hand as a sieve to take it, to drain the water.
That's just literally taking your hands.
But that's not even a borer thing. It's just wetting them. They're not, your hand isn't becoming, you're not separating anything because you're just washing it.
Right.
As in, like, you're not squeezing, the water's coming from the tap, so there's no separate, as in, it's more that if you were to drain the tomatoes are in a box, and then you're draining the water from the box, and you know, some of the schmutz comes out, or some of the leaves or whatever.
Right.
But I guess if you and you use your hand to stop all the tomatoes coming out.
Right. Okay, so first, Juliet, I think got it right that by rinsing and washing under the tap, that's totally allowed. By the way, that itself, the fact that we can rinse away the debris, the schmutz stuff from fruits, vegetables, or even our plates, want to wash plates on Shabbat. Why is that allowed? We're actually removing bad from good. We're rinsing away the bad from the plate. So the answer to that is, Shlomo Zalman came up. I think I mentioned this in the past, but if not, then it's good to mention again. Good to mention it. And if I did, then it's good to remind ourselves again that this is now borer, because when you ask a person, what are you doing now? He's not going to tell you, I'm separating bad from good. I'm cleaning the plate. So it's not at all an action of separation, it's an action of cleaning. What defines the difference? Is it only the way people call it, the way people refer to it?
Sorry,
not that only.
Sorry, I'm just gonna, would it also be the same then when you are, let's say you're using any lettuce that you're gonna soak, or spinach you're gonna soak, let's say in salt water, but that's called checking in the sense because you don't want to eat the bugs.
Okay. Okay. Keep that question. That's an excellent question. Okay, excellent question, Leah. Keep that question. We'll be getting to it actually in the book. I'll skip to it shortly after I finish explaining the sifting the water. Yeah, it's a letter Tetvav in the book. Exactly your question is going to be coming up soon. I'll jump to it soon because you asked this question. But beforehand, I'll just complete this answer. So what defines an action as cleaning versus separating? Says Reb Shlomo Zalman, when we're cleaning something, it's usually something that we do over and over again. Meaning, the plate has been dirtied, we clean it, and then we dirty it again. We're going to use it again the following day, week, hour, doesn't matter when. It's going to be used again. And then we clean it off and then use it again. So it's sort of, you see that the plate always remains what you want to use, and the dirtying of it is not a mixture here, it's just a dirty plate. And to clean it off, it's considered cleaning. Whatever, it may be a little bit difficult to define exactly, but I think we understand the idea behind it. No one says, I'm separating bad from good. Whereas if you have a rotten apple within a whole bunch of apples, you're not going to say, by removing the rotten apple, you're not going to say, I'm cleaning the apples. I'm cleaning the pile of apples. You don't say that. I'm separating the bad apple from the pile. That's the difference. Now, so going back to rinsing under the tap, tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, grapes, and all that, even though you're holding on to them with your hands and letting the water fall through your hands, it's not an action of separating here or anything. You're cleaning them. So that's why it's okay. It's not even an action of bora to begin with. But what Juliet asked was when you want to then dump all the water from the container after you've soaked it in water, you've soaked the tomatoes or grapes in their container, plastic container, you've soaked it in water, soap in water, and now you want to drain it out by using your hand to block the tomatoes or grapes from falling into the sink, and you want just the water and all the bad stuff to fall to go away, that's definitely considered separating. The cleaning is when you clean it under the faucet. Now that you've soaked it in soap and water, and now you want to get rid of the water and all the debris, all the garbage parts from within that container, that's already separating. So that you cannot do by pouring it out of the container and blocking with your hand what's not going to fall out. You're using the sides.
So can you just pick it up?
Oh, exactly. That's what you should be doing. But one more line I would say before what to do, how to get it out. Before I would say that even the container itself is in a way serving as a utensil to separate. That I'm not sure about. Is the mere fact that you're pouring out the water. But it wouldn't, if that's a container or not, it wouldn't matter, because remember we said that when you pour something out that you do not want and leave what you do, what you've poured out is considered what you're separating away from what you do want. So here you're throwing away the bad from good. So even before we discuss utensils, is the container utensil, is your hand a utensil? Before we even discuss that, the mere fact that you're pouring out the bad and leaving the good, that's considered separating bad from good, not good from bad, because your action shows that you want to get rid of the bad. So you can't do it anyhow, even without your hand, using your hand as a utensil to separate. So how do you deal with this issue? So firstly, we said, this I'm sure we said previously in one of the classes on Borer, repeat it again always to refresh our minds. We've said that if the fruits, vegetables, whatever you've now soaked in water, now you want to get rid of the water, if it's larger than a walnut, each and every fruit on its own or vegetable on its own is larger than a walnut, then it's not even considered a mixture with the water that's there. But there are also some solid pieces that are garbage, like the leaves and the branches that were just stuck to the tomatoes, and by soaking them, they came off. So then it's not good. Only if it's clear water that you want to dump water, soap and water is also okay. That's clear water. You want to dump it out of the container and be left only with tomatoes or grapes. If they're larger than a walnut, then it's not considered a mixture. You can pour out the water just like that. But if they're smaller than a walnut, then it is considered a mixture. So definitely cherry tomatoes and grapes are definitely smaller than walnuts. So you cannot pour out the water in this case. But if you're doing this soaking for lettuce is larger than a walnut. Or maybe the baby leaves are smaller, but most of the leaves are larger than a walnut. So then you can pour out the water. And then we come to the question, can you use your hand to block the lettuce from falling out together with the water? So that's a good, your hand there, like a utensil or not. So I'm checking here a sec in the book. No, he doesn't discuss using a hand for doing that. No, I don't see it right now. I would have to check this question. I have to check this question. It's interesting. Okay. more here. No. Okay, Belinda, I'll check that question. If you're using your hand to block the lettuce from falling out, it's not exactly the same example as the pit with the lemon. When I squeeze a lemon and hold my hand and hold the hand with separate fingers and squeeze it over separate fingers and let the pits get stuck in between the fingers, that's a real, that's like really making a net with your fingers, although it's abnormal. It's not the normal way to do things, to do it, to separate, and therefore it's rabbinitically forbidden. It's bishinui, but that's really using it as a sift. Whereas when you're just blocking with your hand, you're blocking the lettuce from falling together with the water, falling out with the water. We said that the actual situation is not borer. Oh, well, actually, you know what? No, I'm thinking something else now. Since we said that larger than walnut even considered a mixture, so you can block it with your hand. The moment it's not a mixture, so it's not borer. There's no borer. You can do it for non-immediate use. Use a utensil to do the separating and do bad from good. It's not at all a mixture. We said many times, if it's not a mixture, there's no issue of borer whatsoever. So that's the solution right now. The solution is that we don't have to get to the question. The question doesn't start because it's not borer at all. When it's larger than walnut, together with clear water, not a borer issue at all. That's why we said we can use these utensils that carry in them pickles, and you lift up. It's a plastic with a handle and has holes on the bottom. You lift it up, all the water seeps through, and you're left with the pickles themselves on top. You can do that because the pickle is larger than walnut, and therefore you're not separating because it's not considered a mixture. But olives, you can't use that device for olives because olives are smaller than the walnut, so it's considered a mixture, and therefore you can now lift it up on Shabbat. So how do you get the cherry tomatoes or the grapes out of the plastic container after you've soaked them in soap and water? So as Juliet said, you just pick out the grapes or the tomatoes, pick them out, and leave the water, the accumulated water, in the container. This way you've taken good from bad, separated good from bad for immediate use with your hand. So all three conditions, you're fine. You cannot pour out the water when they're smaller than the walnut because then you're separating bad from good. So that would be the solution. Then you obviously would have to rinse them once again just under the tap for a second to clean. But that's cleaning, as we said. That's fine. Rinse it up in order to clean them from the soap and water that's still stuck to them. Okay. Yeah. Here's another quite possible scenario. If you make yourself a cup of tea with a tea bag, we said that's permitted according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, b'kli shlishi, only third vessel. The urn, pour the hot water into an empty cup. From that empty cup, pour it into another empty cup, and in that, you can put your tea bag. So if you have a tea bag in your tea, and now you want to remove it away and squeeze it in a way that the remaining flavor of the tea will still come down into the cup, and then dispose of the tea bag. Is that allowed? So from a squeezing point of view, it would have been okay. There would not be an issue of dash. That we haven't dealt with yet. That's the next chapter. But from borer point of view, it's definitely not allowed. How come? Because let's see what we're doing. What are we doing here? Inside the tea bag, before you squeeze it, what's inside the tea bag? Water and tea leaves, right? The leaves of the tea and the water. Now that you're squeezing out the water with the flavor of the tea, you're squeezing it out of the tea bag. What's happening now? You're separating the water from the leaves. The leaves are definitely much, much, much smaller than a walnut. It's ground leaves. They're all ground inside. So each piece of leaf that's separate from another piece of leaf are all tiny, tiny leaves, tiny, tiny pieces. So it's much smaller than a walnut. And you're separating water from the tea bag, from the tea leaves. Now, although that's considered good from bad because you're squeezing in order for the water to come out and leave the mixture from within the tea bag, so you're extracting good. You want that water. That's what you want. And you're taking away and then throwing away the bad. So it's good from bad. That's okay. With your hand, because you're squeezing with your hand. That's okay. But what is not letting out the tea leaves into your cup? It's the bag itself. The bag itself has tiny holes in it. And when you squeeze, the water comes out, the leaves stay inside. That bag is a kli. That's a utensil. So you can't do that because you're doing boreh with a utensil. It could be maybe shinui. It's not the norm to do such a thing, but sometimes a lot of people do it. But if it's not normal, then it's rabbinically forbidden, shinui. But it could even be normal. And if it's normal, it's d'oraita, prohibition. So you mustn't do that. Says the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, not only can you not squeeze the water in the tea bag, you also cannot even let it drip. Let's say you lift up the tea bag, and now you're letting it drip some drops from within the tea bag. Those drops are coming from within the tea bag. If they're external to the tea bag, not a problem. That's not an issue because they're already separate. They're not a mixture. But if drops fall from inside, from within the tea bag, fall out of the tea bag into your cup, and you're holding it up to let the drops fall down, then again you're separating by use of a utensil. What's the utensil? The bag. That helps you separate the tea leaves from the water and allow the water to fall down. It's a utensil to use that you're using for boreh, and that's not allowed. So how do you get the tea bag out of the cup? If you don't want it to remain for a long time and have a very dark tea, concentrated tea, you want less of the flavor, so the simple way is just to lift up the bag and immediately move it away from the cup. Letting it drop, instead of letting drops come down, just move it quickly away from the cup. And then in the meantime, whatever falls on the way is really not intended. And it's usually going to be the drops that are external to the tea bag and not from inside. So you just quickly move it away, remove it, and you're fine. Then no problem. Boreh, you're not squeezing it. You're not letting it drip. You're just quickly removing it. No problem. Okay. Now we have a very interesting situation. Next case. And this may be the last one for today. We've covered nice grounds today. Baruch Hashem. The next following case is as follows. Let's say you want to borrow. I may have mentioned this in introductory here, but we'll do it again, refresh our minds, maybe not. Let's say you want to borrow a bowl or a plate or a serving spoon or a whatever it is from a neighbor. And your use for that is in 5 hours. You're not using it immediately now. You want to have it ready, prepared for the meal, and you're missing some bowl or plate or whatever, serving utensil, and you know your neighbor could help you out. You want to ask them for this missing object you need. Can you ask them to lend it to you when they would have to separate it from a pile of things that it's mixed in together? Now, we're not talking about a pile of the exact same, because you said if it's the same mean, the same type, there's no boreh. Like let's say I have a pile of plates that are all the same shape and the same size. That's not considered boreh. They can remove one and give it to you. That's not considered separated, bad from good or good from bad. But if, let's say, it's a serving spoon or a bowl that's within a whole pile of other utensils, and it's considered a mixture because it's not the same type utensil that's all in a pile. So they would have to now separate that serving spoon from the mixture that it's in the drawer. and hand it to you. Now, they're taking good from bad, because the good is what you want, the bad is what you don't. So they're taking good from bad, they're separating good from bad with their hands. So in the meantime, we're fine. What about immediate use? You're not planning on using it within the next 5 hours. On the other hand, this person who's lending it to you, right now, they're fulfilling a mission, immediate mission, by giving it to you. They're performing a mitzvah of helping you with a situation. Your lack of this and this utensil, they're helping you. That's chesed. So they're fulfilling a mitzvah immediately, but you don't need to use it until later on. Can that be done or not? Should you be telling the person, you see, I don't want to use it in the next 5 hours. They'll tell you, then come back and have half an hour before you need it, and I'll give it then. So, most poskim say, check exactly what there was another situation we'll get to in a second that's a drop different. But in this case, all poskim agree that it's not permitted. It's not permitted. You have to tell that person or don't come to them until you're an hour within an hour from the meal, and then ask to borrow that utensil. If it's more than that, then you're making them stumble on borer. You're not doing the borer because they're the ones that are separating, but you have to tell them, you see, I have 5 more hours. And meaning, don't give it to me. I come in the first place. Just don't go there. Only go to borrow the utensil when you're within an hour from the meal. So that's according to all poskim, not allowed because they'll be giving it to you for later on use, which is a borer. It's not for immediate use. But what about this following case? Let's say your neighbor that you know has this utensil you'd like to borrow. They're about to leave their home for till the end of Shabbos, let's say. They won't be at home till the end of Shabbos. And you need this for another 5 hours from now. And you hear them leaving their apartment. You step out and you say, where are you going? They say, we're going for a long to you. We're going to visit someone on the other side of town. We'll see Motzei Shabbat. Can you then ask them to please lend you that utensil you need? Still, it's not for immediate use. For 5 more hours till you need to use it. But what's the difference? Most poskim, like Rav Yashiv and Rav Karelitz, most poskim hold that it's still not allowed. What does it matter that your neighbor will not be around when you really need it? Right, giving it to you for immediate use. But Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach came up with an amazing idea. He says, what I said before actually uses it now in this case. The fact that this person will not be around in 5 hours to give it to you, or 4 hours to give it to you within the hour, because they'll be away till the end of Shabbat, that permits them to give it to you now, even though you're not going to use it immediately. How come? Or within an hour. How come? Because they're now performing a mitzvah of lending it to you, chesed, to help you with something you're lacking. And they can't do it later on. If they could do it later on because they're staying home, then come back later. But they won't be home. So for them, the only time they can fulfill this mitzvah is now. So that's considered borer for immediate use. What's the use? The fact you're fulfilling a mitzvah. That's also use of a utensil. It's not just to use it to dish out food from the pot. It's also to perform mitzvot with it. Therefore, it's considered immediate use. So when they're staying home, you mustn't ask for it more than an hour before the meal. When they're leaving, according to Shlomo Zalman, you can ask for it then and there and use it even 5 hours later. According to Yashiv and Karelitz, no, even then not. You can definitely rely on Shlomo Zalman and borrow, or on the lender's side, lend the utensil to not going to use it immediately if it's a situation where we won't be able to do so later on. So we're performing a mitzvah right now. By the way, this reminds me of a cute idea that Rav Aviner spoke about in the past. He says that people who use their car to help others. For example, tramps. They see people sticking out their hand and to hitch a ride, and they take them. So he says they're making their car a mitzvah car. It becomes a mitzvah car. It's not just for your own use and purpose. Rather, you perform mitzvot with your car. And it makes it a much holier car and much more protected car. You shall protect the car more because you're using it for mitzvah. That's similar to what we said now, that by lending this utensil, you're performing a mitzvah, not just the actual use of a car is to get from place to place. But besides that, you can use the car for mitzvahs, to take hitchhikers on the way for a mitzvah. By the way, this also Avinir points out too, that the fact that we invite a family over for a meal on Shabbat, that they can easily eat their meal at home, that's not considered Achnasas Orchim. That's nice. It's to socialize and to connect to people. That's very nice. Speak Divrei Torah. Those are very nice things, but it's not Achnasas Orchim. Achnasas Orchim, the way Chazal meant it, was when people had no home to be in, had no food to eat. Either they were very poor, or they were on a journey from place to place. Remember, days you couldn't take with you too much food. You couldn't be at a hotel or motel on the way. You had to be hosted by different nice people who have you over. Otherwise, you're stuck with nothing. That's Achnasas Orchim. So we invite someone to eat by us for a meal in their neighborhood, and they have their own home and food. That's Achnasas Orchim. There could be other mitzvahs involved, maybe, but it's not the mitzvah of Achnasas Orchim. If we look for a person who's in need, who's needy, who has no place for Shabbat, that's Achnasas Orchim. By the way, that happened here in Ol Ari a few years ago. We were leaving shul Friday night, and this woman approaches us, elderly-looking woman. She wasn't from our neighborhood as far as was familiar to us, and she asked if someone can accommodate her for Shabbat. So we said, what happened? She said she was on her way from Kfar Saba to Bnei Brak to one of her children, and it so happened that she left home too late, unfortunately, and the cab started the way, and she realized that she was getting to Hadlakas Neros. I don't know how she realized that, because it's so close nearby Kfar Saba. I think she said Kfar Saba. Maybe it was Netanya, I don't know. Anyway, she realized that she was in the car when it's going to go over time. So she asked the cab to let her off. And the closest town that she could walk to was Ra'anana from Route 4. And she came in and she looked for a shul, a synagogue, and she found Ol Ari, which is on Urvutsky, which is at the very beginning of Ra'anana from the eastern side. So she asked for accommodations for Shabbat. And obviously, many people jumped on the mitzvah. This is a real mitzvah of Achnasas Orchim. This is the real way. So the funny thing happened was that we're eating our dinner, our Shabbat meal, and so we hear a knock on the door. Who was it? One of the community members, one of the Kihila members, who came to us and said that he's the one that was zoche for the mitzvah of accommodating this woman for Shabbat, but she wouldn't eat by them because she was more of a Haredi element. And she said, with all due respect, I eat certain kashrus that that I'm careful about. And here in your home, it's a different kashrus. I can't eat. So thank you for your intent, for your great intentions, but it's not helping me because I can't eat by you. So he came all the way to our house because he knew that we're a little bit more strict in the kashrus that we use. He came to our house and we gave him a few boxes, a few containers, plastic containers with food that my wife had cooked for Shabbat. And this way, this woman ate by them and slept by them, but eating our food. So it was turned out a mutual mitzvah this way. So that's what we talk real Achnasas Orchim. It's socializing, it's connecting to people, it's developing hopefully spiritual growth. Yes. Yes.
Sorry, would the Achnasas Orchim be also part of a single person who otherwise would have been left by themselves without really a Shabbat they have food, they have money, they have house, but they would be just, be it elderly, be it a young bocha or seminary girl or,
Yeah, that's definitely a big mitzvah of, let's say, if you're alone, you would love the people when you invite you over. So if you get invited, you're happy or pleased, and that's a big mitzvah to make them happy. That's definitely true. But I believe it's still not achnasas orchim. Achnasas orchim is in a case where it's an actual person who has nowhere to be. So it's a huge mitzvah. Be nice, be good. That's definitely a huge, it's a greater mitzvah than inviting a family that has where to be and has food and has money and everything else. That's a much smaller mitzvah than inviting a single person who doesn't have where to be. That's definitely. But it's still not yet achnasas orchim. Achnasas orchim is when it's someone that really is stranded in your town and you can have him over and he has nowhere else to be. Which is quite rare in our days. So Rav Ner, so just finishing off, Rav Ner says that this is what we do. We take a hitchhiker in our car. That's achnasas orchim, because they're stranded in the middle of nowhere or on the streets where they can barely catch a cab or a bus in some locations. Sometimes they're just doing it to save money. That's like the youngsters who hitch rides just to save money. But sometimes really a person who's stranded, where no one can take him to where he needs to go besides you with your car. So that's achnasas orchim. It doesn't have to be necessarily for a meal, for food, for accommodations, for sleep. That's also achnasas orchim. You're inviting them into your car and taking them to where they need to go, and they have no other way to get there. So that's a true way, and now they're fulfilling the mitzvah, great mitzvah. Okay, we a little bit went off on a tangent, and it's getting late. So that's it for today. Called Tuv as usual. Thank you very much. Have a Shabbat Shalom. I'll send a recording.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, very welcome. All Tuv. Bye-bye.